Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Fair Housing Tenant Protection listening sessions. My name is Douglas Trong. I'm the Fair Housing Manager within the Policy Development Division. I've been with ACD since 2018 in various positions. For those who may find it difficult to see me on your screen, I would like to describe myself. I have black hair and brown eyes. Today, my hair is slicked back. I'm wearing a black and white plaid dress shirt. Today, we are going to discuss tenant protections. This session will include a 45-minute presentation from California Civil Rights Department on rights and responsibility related to housing discrimination, including protections relating to disabilities, source of income, and criminal history, followed by a 45-minute listening session. We have a group of folks from ACD Fair Housing team with us today, but your presenter will be myself, Douglas Trong, and Kara Rochford. For today's listening session, we'd like to go over a few community standards to encourage an open and productive dialogue. If you wish to speak, please raise your Zoom hand by clicking the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen, and will enable the ability to unmute your microphone so you can share your thoughts. This will only occur at the very end of today's session and will be for feedback and responses to the question we provide on the screen. Please use the Q&A icon located at the bottom of your screen to share comments or questions you may have today for Kara from the Civil Rights Department. If you want to stay anonymous, choose that option when writing your message. Again, the Q&A can be used for general comments or for questions for Kara, but raising your Zoom hand to speak at the end of today's presentation will be strictly for feedback and answer to our questions. Be mindful of different style of communication and learning. Recognize some of us are external processors who think out loud, while others are internal processors who need time to reflect before contributing. Be mindful of space you occupy in conversation, allowing others to participate. Be curious. Embrace the opportunity to learn from one another. If someone shares something new or unfamiliar, stay curious. Take note of their comments and revisit them later for further exploration. Use I statements. During today's listening session, when sharing your thoughts or experiences, please use I statements. This approach fosters a non-defensive atmosphere and encourage constructive dialogue. For example, say, I don't understand, can you please rephrase, instead of saying you don't make sense. Help us explore and develop the fair housing impediments. Your first-hand or second-hand knowledge of tenant protection issues in California can greatly help our goal for addressing impediments in the upcoming 5-year cycle. If you choose not to speak today, or if you think of something you'd like to share at a later point, you can always email us at aifairhousingreport@acd.ca.gov. We'll start by giving you an overview of the AI update timeline and our public engagement plan. Then our partners from California Civil Rights Department will deliver a 45-minute presentation on fair housing. This presentation will cover rights and responsibility related to housing discrimination, including protection for disabilities, different income sources, and criminal history. Following the presentation, we'll have a 45-minute period for listening and discussion. Afterward, we'll present you with some questions and open up for further discussion. You will have the option to respond to this question via poll if you prefer. Fair housing is a shared responsibility of both the federal and state government, as mandated by the Fair Housing Act. The presentation offers a brief overview of this concept. The United States Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, provides funding to HCD for housing program and enforces federal fair housing laws, including investigating housing discrimination. HCD in turn is obligated to comply with HUD requirements such as producing an analysis of impediment to fair housing choice every 5 years as part of our consolidated plan. This process involved engaging stakeholders, advocates, and the public to identify barriers to fair housing choice and issues affecting protected classes. HCD implements policy and programs, some of which are federal funded and preserve and expand safe, affordable, and inclusive housing opportunity. Additionally, HCD enforces state planning zoning, affirmatively further fair housing, and anti-discrimination laws related to land use. The California Civil Rights Department is responsible for enforcing state and federal fair housing laws, refining legal frameworks, and investigating housing discrimination. In a few moments, we will hear from the Civil Rights Department for a presentation on housing discrimination and protections.
Let me pause you really quickly, Doug. Can we do a really quick mic check? I'm getting some messages that our interpreter's microphone is sort of fading in and out a bit. So I'm wondering if we can maybe do a mic check.
Okay.
If people can maybe enter into the Q&A if they're able to hear clearly. I just want to make sure before we continue with the rest of the presentation, you can hear clearly. Okay, I'm seeing these and I'm wondering also about anybody listening to the Spanish interpretation. Can you hear that clearly? Hearing, okay. All right, thank you so much. We'll go ahead and continue with the presentation. Just let me know. It says it's a bit choppy and a little bit low on the Spanish side. So, okay. So just keep comments coming. Let me know as the presentation goes on, and we'll see if we can do anything about it, okay? Sorry to interrupt, Doug.
No problem. Welcome back. I'm glad that issue will get fixed. All right, I'll start on slide number 5. The AI team held a kickoff webinar on January 4th, and we are currently in the listening session and webinar phase of the timeline. By March 20th, we will conduct a total of 6 listening sessions, including this one and the 4 previously held, as well as 2 webinars coming soon. Registration links for these events were included in the e-blast, and reminders will be sent prior to each listening session and encourage registration. Additionally, registration links are available on HCD website. At the same time, we are seeking feedback through our Community Needs Assessment Survey until April 1st. Following this, we will work to finalize a report. We plan to open the public comment period and hold hearings from mid-July to mid-August, with the finalized version scheduled for publication at the end of August 2024. You don't need to memorize everything on this slide. It's just an overview of our upcoming events. We'll promote them through e-blast, social media, and our website. The listening session will be cover a variety of topics. We've already completed a session on homelessness, disability and aging population, persons who are immigrants, and tribal Native American people. Upcoming session will cover mobile home parks. You can register for upcoming session using the same e-blast you receive reminder along the way. In addition, we will host 2 webinars focusing on urban housing and rural housing in March. A public hearing will take place from mid-July through mid-August 2024. We are still finalizing dates and location for the public hearings. Please stay tuned for updates Any updates due to the state budget will be promptly communicated to you. So we have released a community needs assessment survey on January 30th in multiple languages, including English, Spanish, Chinese, Korean, Tagalog, and Vietnamese. The survey will remain available until April 1st, 2024. We encourage everybody to complete the survey and to encourage others to do the same. You can access the survey on a city website. Simply visit the main page and select Begin Survey to choose your preferred language. We will continue to mention it during any public meeting held until April 1st. And with that, I will hand it over to Carol Bradford, Senior Fair Housing Employment and Housing Counsel at Civil Rights Department. Carol will present on tenant rights and responsibilities relating to housing discrimination, including protection relating to disability, source of income, and criminal history, then followed by a 45-minute listening session. Thank you all.
Hi, everybody. My name is Kara Birdfair. I work for the California Civil Rights Department. I'm a senior counsel there, and I focus on fair housing. So thank you for letting me be here to talk to you a bit today. All right. Quick, boring, lawyerly disclaimer. So basically, we're not giving you legal advice today. We're not publishing any type of guidance. You know, we are just right now giving you some information. Sorry, I just got a message saying that the notes are showing and I'm not sure why. So I'm just gonna go with it. Okay, can someone tell me how to hide presenter view?
Sarah, I think if you switch your screens, it will work.
Switch my screens, like, oh, I see.
At the top.
At the top, like.
Maybe under display. Yeah, maybe under display settings, that drop down.
Where is that? Can you show me?
Oh,
I see. I see. All right. Just pause recording. 3 dots, hide presenter view. Hide video panel. Can you not see the notes now? Is it better or no? No.
Can you try the hide presenter view? That might be the option.
It's not giving that to me. Sorry.
Oh.
So I have an idea.
Go to the center bottom of your slide, the 3 dots.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I did before.
Oh,
there we go. Thank you so much to whoever. I apologize. Okay, I swear I do this all the time. So going back really quickly to before, basically I'm from the Civil Rights Department. I'm a housing attorney. I've been practicing for about 15 years, all in fair housing. And we're just here today to talk to you a bit about fair housing, but we're not giving you any type of legal advice. This presentation could be like several days long. You know, it could, you know, a lot of the topics I'm going to talk about, I am going to, you know, go into just a little bit of detail, but again, you know, this could be a much, much longer presentation, but I'm just going to talk very briefly about what we do at CRD, and I'm going to talk about fair housing laws, and just a few quick overview of a few specific protected characteristics that we hear a lot about. And I'm also going to try and answer some of your questions. So with that, we're California Civil Rights Department. We have a huge job. We enforce many of California's civil rights laws, including those that prohibit housing discrimination. And let's get into it. So what is fair housing? If folks want to throw some ideas in the Q&A, you can. But fair housing is generally the right to choose where you want to live without facing unlawful housing discrimination. And basically, you know, it's the right to choose where you want to be, the community, the place that you live, the schools and areas that are near you. And why do you think fair housing is an important issue? Again, if you feel like you would like to answer that question, you can throw an idea in the chat, or the Q&A, I should say. And I'm actually going to play a short video for everyone. This is a clip from a documentary called A Matter of Place, and it just talks a bit about housing discrimination. And I think it's really helpful, and it kind of just sets, the stage for what we're going to talk about.
I was shown a nice apartment up on the top floor by the super of the building. We were looking around, you poking around as you do look in the closets and this, and oh, this looks nice. And yeah, okay, I got to get my wife to come and see this. And we went over and looked out the window a little bit, and he looked around and he said, listen, I've been doing this for 30 years in this building, and I've never let one black person live here yet.
Housing discrimination is very prevalent in American life, and one of the ways we know that is through studies that are conducted by private fair housing groups, that there really is pervasive discrimination in terms of rental housing, in terms of people who are trying to buy homes. They may do it in a very friendly way. They may direct you to a different kind of housing opportunity. They may say, oh, I suddenly have nothing available.
Looking for an apartment in New York City is like Navy SEAL training. I mean, it's pretty intense. You're gonna go through a lot of apartments, looking for apartments on Craigslist, looking through brokers. It can be quite challenging.
Constantly running around to all different corners of the city, and then also presenting your credentials. Our financial situation was good, that our credit was good. We both had good jobs, we both had good backgrounds. There was nothing that we could think of that would disqualify us from getting the best apartment that we could afford. We both had really sort of clear criteria as far as what we wanted in terms of apartments. I wanted something that was spacious and sunny and lots of light and whatever. We wanted enough room for ourselves to be comfortable, nice neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, we found this one in Park Slope, and it seemed ideal. From the description, from the pictures. There was a big snowstorm in progress. It was just beginning on Saturday. And there were not a lot of people who called Andrea, who lived there, to make appointments to see the apartment. So we got there first. We were the first ones who saw it. Apparently, we were the only ones who saw it because the other couple that was scheduled to come by never did make it because of the storm. It was beautiful. When we saw it, it was exactly what we were looking for. It was spacious and sunny, and the apartment itself was in good condition. The building was in good condition. The neighborhood was great. It was ideal.
Immediately, Steve phoned the real estate broker to rent the apartment.
We had a pretty good exchange. She gave me a list of items that I would need to bring in order to begin the application process. She faxed over the material. She goes, it sounds like you guys are good and qualified candidates. I told her our credit score was excellent. She was excited on the phone. I told her that the next morning I'd be there bright and early. She said, okay, great, we'll see you tomorrow morning. Wednesday, I go to the realty office and I asked the receptionist, is Roseanne available? Roseanne heard me. She stood up and said, hello, can I help you? And I began the process of giving her all of my paperwork. As I'm giving her my IDs to make a copy for my wife and I, the receptionist turns and says, the copier's broken. At the time, Roseanne had a peculiar look on her face, as though that's news to her.
Steve went to a nearby shop to get the copies himself.
I come back, I give her a photocopy of our IDs, and I start to pull out money in order to pay for the application fee. And she's told me that I'm not gonna take your money. And I was like, why not? And she said that there are other applications ahead of yours, so if we get to yours, we'll contact you. And I was just shocked and stunned. I was of the impression that I was a very different circumstance.
This is this.
All right, I'm going to move back to the presentation now, but a few folks asked the name of this video, and it's called A Matter of Place. I'm going to be sending out, I believe, a PDF of the PowerPoint, or HCD will, so there's a link to it there, but also if you Google it, it's available online for free. So, and there it is. So let's just launch in. We'll talk a bit more about fair housing. So what is a protected characteristic? I feel like it's something a lot of people kind of know what we mean, but it's a really hard thing to explain. But, you know, in a nutshell, protected characteristics, they're things about a person or a group of people that are protected by the law from discrimination. An example is, you know, the law protects people from discrimination based on race. So race is a protected characteristic. And we at the Civil Rights Department enforce most of the housing discrimination laws in California. We're mainly going to be focusing on today the Fair Employment and Housing Act that protects people based on their protected characteristics from housing discrimination. It's a more strong version of the federal Fair Housing Act law, but a similar idea. We also enforce laws, the Unruh Civil Rights Act, which prevents discrimination by businesses, including housing providers. The Disabled Persons Act, it gives people with disabilities and other medical conditions the right to full and free use of all public places, you know, buildings, hospitals. Also, Government Code 1135, it's basically a law that says, if you take money from the state of California, you can't engage in discrimination. So this is a list of the protected characteristics in California. I'm not going to read them all, but just note, you know, we have gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. There's definitely a lot more protections in California than there are in the rest of the country, and definitely under the federal law. Also, disability and medical condition, familial status, and primary language, immigration status, citizenship, age. And this includes both being in a group. So say, you know, you are a person with a disability, being perceived to be in a group. So say somebody thinks you have a disability and you don't, you're still protected from discrimination based on that perception, or associated with a person who has a protected characteristic. So say you're a mom of a kid with a disability, you would be protected as well based on that association. So there's also rights that are not specific protected characteristics, but that kind of flow from them. One of those is, you know, you do have a right to live in housing free from harassment. I'm going to touch briefly on that at the end. There actually is a right to operate a licensed childcare in your home. And there's protections for people with criminal histories, which I'm also going to get into. So who has to abide by fair housing laws? This is actually a much bigger list than a lot of people think. So landlords, housing authorities, cities and counties, but also, you know, mortgage lenders, builders, and people who are companies that provide housing related services, things like water, sewer, and electricity. They can't discriminate. You know, their services related to having housing, so they're covered. And now I'm going to go through a few specific protected characteristics. Like I said at the beginning of the presentation, you know, each of these protected characteristics could be their own 1 or 2 hour training. And, you know, I'm just going to scratch the surface, but give you an idea. So the first protected characteristic I'm going to talk about is source of income discrimination. So basically, housing providers can't discriminate against an applicant or a tenant based on how they're going to pay their rent. So as long as, you know, the funds that you're using are lawful and you are verifiable in some way, you know, a housing provider can't discriminate against somebody for using that to pay their rent. So, you know, obviously income from employment, but also funds, you know, that are paid directly to a tenant with things like SSI, SSDI, you know, disability benefits, public assistance. Also any type of rental assistance is covered. So, you know, the big one, people, you know, housing choice or Section 8 vouchers, you know, housing providers can't refuse to accept that. Any other type of rental assistance is also covered. And so we're going to go into a hypo. I feel like it's way more fun when you participate and answer some questions. So it's anonymous, your answers. But here I'm going to read the hypo and then I'll ask when I'm done reading to have the person handling the polls to put it up on the screen. So this is Bashir. He has a Section 8 voucher and applies to rent a unit from Ariel. Ariel looks over Bashir's application, says he can have the apartment, but the next day Bashir gives Ariel the paperwork from the housing authority to fill it out. Ariel gets annoyed and tells Bashir, hey, I have no problem with you using the Section 8 voucher, but I'm not filling out all this extra paperwork. So did Ariel violate fair housing law? So if you want to go ahead and share the poll, we'll give you guys about 30 seconds to participate. Okay, go ahead and end the poll. All right, all right. So the results, and I'm going to give you the answer as well. But many of you got this correct. 11% said no, and 89% of you said yes. So let's talk about it. So yes, saying that you will accept Section 8, but effectively not accepting it by refusing to fill out paperwork is still considered to be source of income discrimination. It's something that happens a lot, you know, and it's any type of, you know, hoops that you need to jump through as far as, you know, participating in a particular rental assistance program. A lot of housing providers used to refuse to accept things that required them to give like their tax ID number or information, but that would be source of income discrimination. Also advertisements that say no Section 8, no housing choice, also advertisements that show a preference for where your income comes from. There's a lot of advertisements that say that you have to show that you've worked for the last 6 months, and that's discriminatory because there's people that don't work that receive benefits. And evicting a tenant that you already have because they got a voucher and are now going to use a Section 8 voucher, that's unlawful. And here's some examples of ads. I think most of us have seen those over the years. I'm going to talk about this at the end really quickly, but we actually at CRD, we have a portal. I'm going to give you the web address, but basically you can go there and report to us discriminatory ads you see, and we will send letters out. We also go through different ads, usually on Craigslist, and we send letters to people who have discriminatory language and, you know, things like no Section 8. So I'm going to provide that resource at the end. So we also do fair housing testing at CRD, and one of the things we did fair housing testing is basically you send 2 people in to look at a unit that have like a similar income, similar credit. One person will have a protected characteristic, like they're a person of color. The other person won't, and you look to see if they're treated differently. And we're seeing the people that we hire to do our testing are seeing almost 50% of tests for source of income discrimination. So people wanting, especially people wanting to use Section 8 vouchers, are coming out positive for discrimination. So definitely pretty staggering. We've also seen about 25% showing evidence of race discrimination. So again, unfortunately, and I'm sure many of you are here to talk about these specific instances. Also, this is another protected characteristic, national origin, ethnicity, immigration status. So, you know, national origin, where someone was born, you know, discrimination based on someone's ethnicity, their language, their culture, their customs. Examples of discrimination in housing. And we've had a case about this, but basically a housing provider, we settled a case in 2020 where a housing provider basically threatened to report people who he thought were undocumented, his tenants, to move out in a matter of days, or he would report them to immigration. And we actually received a pretty big settlement for that family, but that's discrimination based on immigration status. And let's do another hypo. This is Rabia. She's a single mom who lives in an apartment complex with her 2 kids, ages 4 and 6, and the apartment complex has a pool. And Rabia has been informed by management that children are only permitted to use the pool Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 3, a time her kids are usually at school. She asked for permission to allow her kids to use the pool on the weekend, and she's told that the rules can't be changed just to accommodate her kids. Is the complex violating fair housing law? If you can go ahead and, thank you, put that poll up.
Looks like answers are coming in really fast. We'll go ahead and give it a few more seconds.
Great.
We've got about 50% of people have answered.
You can go ahead and close the poll, and thank you to those who are participating. So yeah, we have about 57% that are saying yes and 43% that are saying no. And the answer is yes, and let's talk about why. So this is an example of familial status discrimination. Basically, any type of rules or policies that discourage families with children from living somewhere is considered to be familial status discrimination. Like this rule in this example, you know, they effectively made a rule that made it so kids couldn't go in the pool. There are a few exceptions to familial status discrimination. Senior housing, there's certain complexes that are specifically for seniors. They can discriminate against people based on age, but with that exception, you know, you can't discriminate against families with kids. Some other examples, some places will say, you know, a single mom wanting to rent a 1-bedroom with their kids, places will be like, oh, you shouldn't share a room with your kid, you need to get a 2-bedroom. So that's considered to be familial status discrimination. Overly restrictive rules, you know, children in common areas must be supervised at all times. We recently settled a case, a really big one, for about $3 million. It was a huge company that basically prohibited kids from playing outside and required supervision for kids under the age of 14. And we settled that case because that is familial status discrimination. So now we're going to talk a bit about disability discrimination. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. So disability discrimination, discrimination based on a person's disability. This includes, you know, refusing to rent to somebody because of a disability. And a big one is that we see is refusing to grant a reasonable accommodation or modification. We'll go into that. This hypo is Luis. He rents an apartment with his partner and kids. He's disabled, and his main source of income are his disability benefits. They're deposited into his account on the 5th of each month. This is very common. However, his complex has a rule that any rent payment made after the 3rd of the month will be charged a late fee. As a result, Luis has accumulated over $400 in late fees, and this puts his housing in jeopardy. Luis requests a reasonable accommodation to pay his rent later, because that's when he's getting his disability benefits. So did the landlord violate fair housing law? We'll give you guys a few seconds. All right, you can go ahead and end the poll. Okay. And 90% of you said yes, 10% of you said no. Yes, the landlord violated fair housing law. And this is because people with disabilities in housing are entitled to reasonable accommodations. And a reasonable accommodation are changes in rules, policies, practices, services to allow people with disabilities an equal opportunity to enjoy housing. You know, examples of accommodations, there's many. Emotional support animals, more time to meet deadlines, you know, more time to move out, closer parking spaces, obviously paying your rent a little bit later. Other types of economic accommodations, allowing someone to have a cosigner, even if you normally don't allow tenants to have that. You know, an accommodation can be anything. And the refusal to grant a reasonable accommodation is considered to be housing discrimination. All right, and reasonable modifications. Again, this could be its own 4-hour training, but reasonable modifications like accommodations are are for people with disabilities to give them equal access to housing, but they're a physical change or alteration to someone's unit. Examples: installing a grab bar in a bathroom, widening a doorway so someone in a wheelchair can get through, adding a ramp. But there are many, many rules regarding reasonable modifications that I cannot get into based on the length of this presentation. But if we have time for questions, I'm happy to answer some. But the failure to provide a reasonable modification is also considered to be housing discrimination. So this is James. This is our next typo. James applies to live in an apartment, and after he receives his application, after the housing provider gets his application, he runs a criminal history check. The criminal history check states that James has been arrested several times for assault. The housing provider denies his application. Was this a lawful denial? All right, we'll give it about 10 more seconds.
The opinions are exactly split on this one, so everybody put your answers in.
I know it's interesting when I do this presentation often, and without fail, this one is almost always 50-50.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Go ahead and end the poll.
Okay.
Okay. So was this, we have about 50-50, and was this a lawful denial? And the answer is no. Housing providers are actually prohibited from considering some types of criminal history when deciding who can live somewhere, and this includes arrests. So let's talk about it with the caveat that, you know, I could do a 2-hour training on just this topic, but there are fair housing protections for people with criminal histories. Housing providers are prohibited from considering certain types of criminal history. This includes arrests that did not lead to a conviction. So my hypo was a little tricky in that, you know, I talked about arrests, but I didn't talk about James being, you know, convicted of assault. I only talked about him being arrested. So, and the reason that arrests by themselves cannot be considered is they don't really prove anything, because, you know, people are arrested all the time. They're not charged with anything. They're not convicted of everything. I'm sure many of us on here could talk about the disproportionate impact of the criminal legal system on people of color, people with disabilities, and others. There's a lot of racial profiling that's pretty clear by the police and others. So, you know, people of color are disproportionately arrested. So you can't consider just arrest. It has to be a conviction. Also, arrests or records that are sealed or expunged. Anything processed in the juvenile justice system can't be considered. And housing providers are also prohibited from having what we call blanket bans on all people with a criminal history or specific criminal history. This is because a conviction has to be directly related to someone's ability to be a good tenant and not be a threat to their health and safety in order for it to be used to exclude somebody. So you can't just say everybody with felonies can't live here. A lot of housing providers do say that in advertisements, but it's unlawful. It has to be directly related. So an example of this is an applicant has a recent conviction for, you know, burning down an apartment building. You know, I think that in that scenario, a housing provider would probably be able to say that is directly related to a concern for health and safety and the place you're applying, and, you know, we're going to deny you. But say somebody was arrested and convicted of a, you know, DWI 5 years ago. I mean, that does not seem very directly related. So it's likely a housing provider could not use that as a reason to exclude. But again, this is a very nuanced area. But, you know, here's some general information on that. And harassment in housing, just really quickly. You know, as I said before, California's laws prohibit housing providers and others from harassing a tenant based on protected characteristics. You know, this includes the housing provider, their employees, people they hire. So like say you hire a gardener or somebody, also another tenant, another resident of the property, you know, if they're harassing somebody based on protected characteristics, that's also covered. And an important point that I think a lot of people don't realize is that housing providers actually have a duty to correct and end discriminatory housing practices. They have to, so if they themselves or their employees or contractors are engaging in harassment, they need to intervene. But also if they know about a tenant harassing another tenant, based on a protected characteristic, they also have a duty to act. So that's important information. I feel like we get asked that question a lot. I'm going to end here. I think I should have a few minutes to answer questions. Here's a bunch of resources, including the address where you can report discriminatory ads. And also, we have a monthly training series. I do this training, but in a little more detail every other month. And then we do employment discrimination as well. Yeah, so let's go into questions. So it looks like we have.
Thanks, Kara. I'm just going to queue up a couple questions for you.
I love that. Yeah,
okay.
Great.
So there's a question about source of income and how does it work for someone to pay like 2 or 3 times their income in rent?
Okay, so this is important. So as many of you know, so a Section 8 voucher covers a certain portion of your rent, and then the tenant pays the rest. So usually it's about 30% of a tenant's income they pay in rent, and then the rest is covered by the housing authorities. So when someone goes to apply for an apartment and say that the rent is $1,500 a month, you know, and the housing provider will say something like, you know, you need to make 3 times the rent, which would be $4,500. Can that housing provider require that tenant with a voucher to make $4,500 a month? No. If the tenant's portion of the rent is $100, they could require the tenant to make 3 times what their portion of the rent is. So if it's $100, they could screen them and say, hey, you need to make up to like $300, so 3 times the monthly rent. So that's how that works. It's definitely a way that we've seen housing providers kind of try and get around source of income discrimination, but the law is very clear.
And then, Kara, we have a question about accommodations and reasonable accommodations. If a landlord does not receive any government funding whatsoever, are they required to provide reasonable accommodations?
Yes, they're required to provide reasonable accommodations, which are a change in rules or policies. All housing providers have to do that. That's like allowing an emotional support animal, giving someone a closer parking space. Reasonable modifications are different. They're physical changes. For the most part, housing providers that don't receive any type of federal financial assistance or some types of state financial assistance are not required to pay for those physical modifications. So they wouldn't have to pay to install a wheelchair ramp. But there are certain exceptions. One of those being, you know, there are certain rules when you build housing that say, you know, things like a doorway has to be a certain size, you know, cabinets need to be at a certain height. If the housing provider failed to meet those standards when the housing was built, and a tenant later asks for them to modify a unit to make them the same, then at that point, the housing provider would be responsible. Also, you know, if they're not maintaining features of the housing that's accessible, a really good example is, you know, an elevator keeps breaking down. You know, the housing provider has a duty to maintain that elevator because it's an accessible feature. But there's even more to it than that, but I'll end there.
Okay, and I think our last question we'll have you answer live is, can a tenant contact the Civil Rights Department regarding a wrongful eviction? Or what are the steps to make a complaint?
So a few things. The Civil Rights Department can take complaints based on wrongful evictions, but we do not, I repeat, we do not represent people in eviction cases or unlawful detainers. If you get an eviction notice, you should contact legal aid or an attorney that does that specific area. But we can take in complaints that involve evictions that are based on discrimination. A big one being a housing provider, refuses to provide a reasonable accommodation, and because of that, the tenant ends up getting evicted. Like Luis, like say he's the guy who was getting his disability benefits on the 5th, and he was just racking up all this late fee debt. And if a housing provider decided, to apply, his rent payment to those late fees, and then say, hey, Luis, you owe more rent, for example, that could be a discriminatory eviction. You could file a complaint with us, but our complaint process is a lot slower than the eviction process. So we could do an investigation or complaint, and maybe come to a resolution as far as some type of compensation for the person. But for the most part, our intervention, our complaints to us do not stop evictions. Sometimes when attorneys or others have cases where it's very clear and egregious, we may be able to step in, but for the most part, you can file a complaint and we could investigate, but we can't represent people. We don't represent people in evictions. So I hope that clears things up. To file a complaint with us, you can go on our website and file a complaint there. If you're a person with disability or a person who needs language services, those are available in every language. We also have a specific process for reasonable accommodations if people need accommodations to file a complaint to access our services. So that's all available as well.
And then really quickly, could you go back to the second from the last slide? Folks wanted to check out those resources again.
Yep. And I think you're gonna send these out, right?
Yeah, we'll post it as a PDF on our website after we've made it accessible.
All right, I'm gonna have to do this just because, oh. Okay, I don't know what happened there. Give me a sec. Sorry. So the tools that you can usually see are in a white area, so you can't really see them. And I know I need to, let's see. Hide presenter view. So here's that information. You could go on the QR code, and then there's information for discriminatory ads. And then our website, you can file complaints, but also here's a few of the handouts that we have. We have a lot more as well. And I want to just thank you for your time and participation. And I'm going to do my best to answer some of your questions during the next portion that you put in the Q&A. So thank you so much. I'm going to stop. Yeah, thank you.
All right, y'all. That was a fantastic presentation. We are going to move into our feedback and listening session now. I'm Suzanne Hemphill. I am a data research specialist with HCD. Great. Apologies, I'm just grabbing my notes. Okay, so we have some discussion questions coming up. And we're just going to offer these out for folks. And I think we're going to run some polls as well with my colleague, Veronica. So have you ever wanted to live somewhere, but you couldn't? What prevented you from living there? And this is a time when folks can come off of mute. If you want to raise your hand, we'll unmute you.
And just a quick comment to say, these are a little bit separate parts of the presentation whereby Kara is going to be going through some of the Q&A for the things that were written specifically for tenant protections for CRD. So that's where you're going to put any questions that you have that might be directed to her. But if you're raising your hand, we're asking you to respond to the questions that are actually on the screen. So this first one being, have you ever wanted to live somewhere but couldn't? And what prevented you from living there? What does your ideal community look like? Does it exist? What would you need to happen for it to become a reality? What do you want the government to do to make your community better? And have you ever lost your housing, and what would have helped you keep your housing? I will also launch these in a poll and give everybody a couple of minutes per question to type in any responses that they want to. But if you want to respond verbally to any of these, I'm going to go ahead and take the hands up in order. And right now, we have Rose. And the one thing I'll ask of everybody is if you could speak a little bit slowly. We have our Spanish interpreter on the line, and I would love it if she was able to translate the conversation. So go ahead, Rose.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so the first question, I haven't quite answered the other ones yet, but the first one was, have you ever wanted to live somewhere but couldn't? What prevented you from living there? And yes, my answer is yes. And what prevented me from living there was bad credit. However, I learned some loops along the way that I've had to jump through with, getting a place anyways with bad credit, and that was a requirement of double the deposit. So I don't know if that is, to me it was fair at the moment because I was so desperate to get into housing because I had just got my voucher and I've never had one before. But I see that, a lot of people are experiencing the same thing, especially in the area that I live in. And I see it happening a lot more when they have places like Abode helping with a deposits or Sacred Heart or something. They seem to, because not everybody has perfect credit, so I just don't know if it's fair or not. That's all the answer I have right now.
Okay.
I haven't.
Oh, yes.
I didn't have any answers to the other questions yet.
Okay. Thank you so much for sharing. And like I said, we will also launch these in a poll where people can answer in long form. So as those answers come to you, you'll be able to write them out later, or you can raise your hand again. I'm going to move over to Melissa. Melissa, can you unmute yourself, Melissa? R-A-U-H, Rao? Okay. Melissa, you can go ahead and keep your hand up. I'll circle back to you. I have a hand up for S-O. You want to unmute? Are you there?
The next stations cannot be given.
Can you hear me?
We're having difficulty hearing you right now.
My quick thought would be like in the ideal, like the third, what does your ideal community look like? And that
I'm so sorry. The call is cutting out significantly. We're not able to hear you. If you would like, you can always respond to the polls that we're going to post. And a reminder for everybody, you can always submit any of your comments about this to our email inbox. and it's AI Fair Housing Report at hcd.ca.gov. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll, which is really the first question on the screen. And I'm going to give everybody a couple of minutes to respond to it. That's been about 1 minute. I'll give another minute. Okay, about 10 seconds. And right now, I don't see any other hands up, which means, oh, excuse me, I do now have Melissa. Let's hope we can hear Melissa.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So hopefully this has to do with number one. My mother passed away. She lived in a mobile home. The mobile home's in a trust. She owns the mobile home. So it's an HOA with a land lease, and the lease lasts to like the next 30 years. Since the mobile home's in a trust, they're saying since she passed away, it's considered a transfer, which it hasn't. The home's still in the trust. And they said because it's an inheritance that I can't occupy the space and nobody else can, or I'll be fined. And it's 55 and above, and I'm 55. So I'm kind of going through a battle with the HOA. So they're basically, I guess you could see it as stealing my inheritance, but it's not considered any change since the home is in a trust. I just want to know what do I have a protective characteristic? And I'm also a disabled person.
Melissa, that is a great question and a tricky situation. Maybe we can connect offline. I don't know that we can really advise on the specifics of
I
that,
know it's
but
been a nightmare for me. So I'm flustered, and I was happy that I could at least voice this to somebody. And yeah, that'd be great if someone can contact me offline later after the full discussion today. I'd really appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Melissa. Okay, it looks like we have comments from Kendall.
Hi, thank you, team. In terms of question number 3, what do you want the government to do to make your community better? One of the things that keeps coming up in this arena is the issue that a lot of states allow for recordings without approval by a secondary party, specifically for this narrow purpose. So, like in California, we all know you can't privately record someone and then bring that evidence into court, for example, without their consent. But a lot of states are saying, okay, well, let's have this narrow exception to say that you can do that in the housing discrimination sector because it's very difficult for people to identify proof. Most of the time, they're having conversations on the phone with the landlord or in person with a potential landlord. There's not like this giant paper trail that says something explicit like, I discriminated against you because of X, right? So if that were something that would be, I know it's been presented to the California legislator, but if it was something that would actually be passed as a law, I think it would really give people on the ground more bandwidth and authority to establish with HCD or HUD that there really are violations of the law occurring here.
Excellent. Thank you, Kendall. We are aware of this conversation currently going on. So thank you for bringing that to this forum. I'm going to quickly move into the poll for number 2. Allison, just hang tight for me. I'm going to give a reminder at about the 1 minute mark. Okay, it's been about a minute. I'll give it another minute. It'll take about 15 seconds. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll. I'll go ahead and call on you, Allison.
Great, thank you, Veronica. And thanks everyone for the presentation. I'll go ahead and actually answer question 3 because one of the other questions made me think of it. You know, what do you want the government to do better? I would like rental housing in general to be better regulated by our government. You know, I just think of the question asked by the tenant in the mobile home question, and I'm sorry that person's going through that. You know, this happens a lot, and I just think like if a restaurant or a bar or any kind of other like brick and mortar business were doing some of the things you hear in sort of a general conversation with most people in rental housing, you know, I think if it like I said, if restaurants were operating this way, and I'm just not even talking just discrimination, right? Things like requiring tenants to pay in cash. That happens a lot in, you know, for Spanish speakers, they're required to pay their rent in cash. sometimes early. Where do they go for recourse? Where do they go to complain? Where do they go to get justice, right? Sometimes they can go to a housing rights center. Sometimes they'll have to go to a tenants union or something like that, right? Whereas if you're you can complain to the Better Business Bureau, you can complain to the county if you experience something in a restaurant that wasn't, legal. So I would like the state to really start thinking about registering rental properties so we can have a database, starting to enforce these things the way we enforce safety, even if we thought about housing as public safety, and enforcement, and having a place for tenants and landlords to go, and get answers to questions beyond what we have now. That would be a great gift for government, because it affects so much that affects other government services, school retention for employees and for kids, community stability, stuff like that. Thank you for taking my comment.
Absolutely, Allison. Thank you so much.
And really quickly, I just wanted to read a few things that are
just 1 second. I think Kara was going to pop in really quickly to address.
Sure. I was just going to encourage you to send folks to us at the Civil Rights Department. That is definitely considered to be immigration status and national origin discrimination. So they can file a complaint with us. But I do understand what you're saying about not having, advice or legal assistance available immediately. That is definitely a big challenge. But just encourage you to file a complaint.
Thank you, Kara. Okay, and go on, Suzanne.
Okay, I'm just going to lift up a few things from the Q&A box, but if folks want to raise your hand, we're happy to call on you and invite you to come off of mute. So Giovanna answered the question, what does your ideal community look like and what would need to happen for it to be a reality? And she stated low-income communities of color live in areas burdened with pollution, a lack of amenities and green spaces. Many of their communities have food deserts and live far from hospitals or clinics, which make it difficult when folks have disabilities or health issues. And that many communities advocate for better communities, but the cities and counties are not responsive to their needs. And then she goes on to say that it would help to have HCD or another entity hold local governments accountable when they refuse to invest in healthy communities and in low-income communities of color. Thank you for saying that, Giovanna.
Okay, so right now I don't see any other hands up. I'm going to go ahead and launch into question 3. And I will give a reminder when a minute has passed. We'll give it a couple of minutes, and I see you, Anne Marie, with your hand up. We'll get to you right after this. It's been about 1 minute. I'll give it another minute. Okay, about 10 seconds left on the poll. All right, I'll close it. Okay. Let's see here. Anne Marie?
Thank you for calling on me. Um, I would like to reiterate the same thing in regards to, I do agree that the government should review case by case basis. And I think the better thing is more prevention. I was at one point in time a young single mom of one, and because I listed the help of my parents, I never qualified for any governmental housing because I made over the amount at the time. And then to turn around to have me tell somebody that was already in the systems to say, oh, you should never have told them that you should never have told them that you get the help from somebody else. I do think that if now looking back that maybe I could have educated that person and said, okay, well, the system is for everybody. But if you could have gotten off of the system and allowed me to come on because I just wanted to get on while I was between jobs, instead of I basically at that moment in time, you taking all of the money that was for everybody because you didn't want to get the job or educate them so you could be training for a job. And then that way my $100 over would have gone, I don't know, to the good or bad, but I think that people should educate, help them say, okay, you have the amount for this amount of time, and then let's get you off of the help. Let's get you onto your own 2 feet to where you can get the housing unless you truly do need it because you can't make that amount of money or you cannot make the housing payments or anything.
Right, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Anne Marie. How about Lorraine? Are you there, Lorraine? Looks like you're unmuted, but I wonder if you maybe have the wrong microphone selected. Okay, I'm going to keep you in the queue, but I will move over to Kendall.
Thank you. In terms of this question, I just wanted to add, especially on the basis of the individual, I'm sorry, I forgot your name, that brought up the mobile home park piece. Like according to HCD, California has roughly 5,780 mobile home parks, which house roughly 1 to 1.6 million individuals. And in a state of 40 million people, that's a huge chunk of our affordable housing that remains. And there are very easy ways to like maintain rent, maintain access, allow people to consistently enforce their rights associated with home ownership in a space where they are a little more vulnerable because they don't own the land. So having some clarity of enforcement about how we can actually accomplish those goals. Like right now, a lot of that is left to the local government, and it's problematic because for two reasons. One, it's hard to pass in all counties, right? But two, we see that it's disproportionate, that there are counties that they have more money, so they have more nonprofits or more advocates, and other counties that don't because they don't have the resources. And that seems like a very unreasonable thing to do on a local level for that. And then I also wanted to say, from a renter's standpoint, I think there's there have been some great strides that you guys have supported in terms of tenant protections and rent caps, but there are a lot of exclusions to them. And for example, in the community I live in, mom and pop, or what we call mom and pop landlords, are not covered. And I know that that's true of large swaths of California. So it's helpful to expand those rules so we have more consistent rent control where someone knows if I move in somewhere with my family, I'm not going to have to pay more than a 5% increase for starters, but also that if I can't afford that, I don't have to come up with a new security deposit, because for a lot of people, that's the difference between staying safely housed and becoming precariously housed or unfortunately unhoused. So we really need to work on strengthening those pieces to make sure that people have adequate access to housing in general.
Thank you so much, Kendall. Let's try Lorraine. Are you able to unmute and talk to us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you so much. My name is Lorraine Lopez. I actually work with Western Center on law and poverty. One of the things that I think is really important, we're a statewide support center for a lot of legal aid advocates. And one of the issues that we have is that there isn't enough education of the judiciary, especially in the eviction courts, on fair housing defenses and how they operate to keep folks housed and are complete defenses to certain evictions. I have certainly early on in my practice had to pretty much battle judges on allowing those defenses in at trial, including for things like physical and mental health disabilities. So it is, I think, one of the things that HCD can do and CRD can do is to do some outreach to the judiciary through judicial council and educate these judges about how these defenses are permissible and how these laws operate and intersect with the eviction courts.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and launch our final question, question 4 here. And I'll give it a couple minutes. It's been about 1 minute. I'll give it another minute. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it. We don't see any further hands up, so I'll take the opportunity to remind everybody, if you want to share further comments on any of these subjects, you can email us at aifairhousingreport@hcd.ca.gov. You can always visit the California, the Civil Rights Department by going to calcivilrights.ca.gov. And let's see. You can also email contact.center@calcivilrights.ca.gov for anything for them. And without any other hands up, we'll go ahead and conclude today. Thank you all so much for coming and listening and sharing your thoughts and your experiences. We really appreciate it, and we hope we see you at the next one.